Good morning. This is the BLAINESWORLD podcast, where conversations are worth hearing and listening and seeing as well. You can watch each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, get more information about past shows and future shows also at our website, which is behindtheplainsworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and coming to you from my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Graeme Browning. I like how you call it a semi-retired national journalist, for being my guest today. And Graeme, feel free to wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this on YouTube. Give them a big
Hello,
wave.
guys.
Okay, that is Graeme. And Graeme is an award-winning writer, reporter, editor in her career in journalism, newspapers, and television. She worked for the National Journal, Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, Chicago Sun-Times, and UPI as a political and business reporter and columnist. She was a reporter and the first woman on the editorial board of the National Tennessean and a general reporter for the Evansville Courier and Press in Evansville, Indiana. She was also a legal reporter for WKRN in Nashville. Her second career was as a highly successful proposal management experience with IBM Global Services and Deloitte Consulting. She's also the author of 2 books and an instructor at Ollie with the most interesting class, print journalism, then and now. And so the question, Graeme, I always ask the first time I speak with somebody is, as a kid, you grew up where?
I grew up in Evansville, Indiana.
And as a kid growing up in Evansville, Indiana, did you always know you wanted to be a journalist?
I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I started writing poetry when I was 9. And that, if you're going to ask me where that came from, it came from inside. I think sometimes you just, you're born with the kind of a knowledge of this is what I can do and this is what I want to be.
So you started out writing poetry. When did you switch into journalism?
Well, I actually didn't switch per se into journalism until I did the summers during college where I worked for the Evansville Courier Press. And then I went to law school. And after law school, I practiced for a year. I hated it. I was with the federal court, did federal court, worked on bankruptcy cases, and I just hated it. So one day I was in Nashville, Tennessee. I went to Vanderbilt Law School. And one day I just went down to the editor of the Nashville Tennessean and said, I hate what I'm doing. Do you have any space for me? And he put me on as the music critic in their entertainment section, classical music critic. We had a rock and country music critic, and I just, went from there. I love doing it.
Were you a music fan at the time?
Oh yeah, I've been a music fan. I am a classical music fan. And so I enjoyed it because also back then, well, I'm sure it's the same now. In Nashville, the Nashville Symphony was made up of, almost entirely of sessions players, people that did the background and the sessions work in the recording studios. So they could go between, say, opera and Beethoven, back to backing up Willie Nelson. They were very multi-talented folks.
And you mentioned something which is kind of interesting. You mentioned you covered music, and it's one of the reasons I kind of am turned off a little bit with print journalism because I won't mention the paper, but I actually got a print copy of the newspaper for a long period of time, and then they just within the last year or two cut out the coverage of theater. And I'm going to actually stop getting the paper as a result because I was so disappointed. They used to have regular reviews like you did. Then they stopped having reviews to just listings. Now that I couldn't believe it, they stopped putting the listings anymore of local theater. And I was so disappointed with it. And I wrote the paper, not that it mattered, but times change, and
I
it's a
can I
shame.
can get I can give a guess about why they've done that because many newspapers are cutting way, way, way back. And they've been doing that in the last 2 to 3 years because circulation, as maybe Mark may have told you, has dropped like a rock. And they've had to cut back staff, and they're facing, revenue is dropping. So they don't want to spend the time to spend money on things that people don't seem to be reading. And just as an aside, the Washington Post, of course, just cut 300 jobs, kind of decimated their newsroom, and they cut out the book section and the sports section and most of the reviews.
Yeah. But you would think, okay, I'll even accept not doing the reviews. So I now do my own, but just the reviews, just put a listing. Give me, a one column listing, and that was gone. So I was so upset. But it ties into, I guess, what your course is all about too, that you're doing a course on print journalism. And is print journalism still alive, or is it going to be alive?
Well, I don't mean to sound facetious, but I would say, I mean, print journalism, I tend to call it text-based
Okay,
journalism.
good.
Print excuse me, journalism in terms of the newspapers you can hold in your hand and feel, I would say that's going away within a couple of years, because people don't, and when I say people, I mean the younger generations, the ones who, they don't pick up and read things. They read on the cell phone more than anything else, or those of us who grew up with newspapers, and tend to like it, don't do that as much. But actually, we're all changing to it as well. So print when I say I call it actually text-based journalism is because, as I was mentioning, I've gotten really into podcasts, and I've had my last class with my class. We talked all about podcasts, and I showed them different ones. And most podcasters that I follow now, they not only you can log on to their site and you can see what they're talking about. There's a transcript in text, and you can read that if you want. And then they also have the same thing in video. So you can either listen or watch them in video, or you can read it in text. So to me, rather than print, because it's not printed, I prefer it as text-based.
Well, it's funny you say that because we'll even do this with the show afterwards. I'll put in the text or subtitles on it, which I've gotten used to watching Netflix. I love it. So same thing too. The advantage doing the show on Blaine's World, and I'm honored this first time you've done a podcast with video, that they'll be able to see it if they want to, which is kind of cool.
I hope I look okay.
Yeah, well, but also you're talking, and you mentioned to me off the air that some of your students say they still miss the print newspaper. They read the newspaper. And I was like that until my wife made me stop reading it because I was just stockpiling newspapers, and then I was getting black on my hands. And so once you get used to it, most people I think tend to love it once they make the switch.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I remember as a kid, the piles and piles of the print journalism, the print newspapers. We also used to get, even though I was in southern Indiana, my family's from Kentucky for a number of generations, and we would always get the Courier Journal newspaper and on the Sundays. And I love that the Courier Journal. It had an impact on me when I decided to become a journalist. But we'd get that as well as the local newspaper. So we have piles of news, just like you.
well, and I used to love it too, that I would actually read 4 or 5 papers. I can't believe it. And I would enjoy it. I just loved it. And you bring back memories. I think I told you off the air, I was a journalism major at one time.
Mhm.
And I remember going to a New York Met baseball game, and I was invited to be in the press box, and it was very exciting.
Oh,
But one of the reasons I got out of it was the pressure those folks had to face, that they had to cover a game and then write an article within an
yeah.
hour, forget an hour, 10 minutes. And that's a very pressure-filled job, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of I'm a news junkie.
Right.
I'm kind of a type A personality, and I like the pressure. I get bored if things aren't moving and shaking. So yeah, the pressure, and I lived on deadline for 25 years, and as a consequence, I learned never to miss deadline. Even in business, when I'm a consultant, if somebody says we got to have this by 4 p.m., they got it. And you have to discipline yourself. And yes, the pressure is tough, but it always excited me. It worked for me.
So if the reporters then, I guess some of them go to other media, I guess. Like you
Mhm.
said, the staffs of newspapers, especially the Washington paper, went to lose 300 people in a day. It's just incredible. So what is that paper doing then? Are they still going to be doing what they're doing or doing much less of it?
Well, it's very hard to tell. I used to work at the Washington Post, of
Right.
course, not, for a year and a half, but it's very hard to say right now. What I told my class was that no one really knows. There are lots of theories around, rumors, possible ideas, but actually I can't sit here today and tell you what's going to happen. I'm watching just like you are. However, a lot of their really good reporters, people I've followed, and that some of them I knew because I worked at the Post, have all left. They've lost Jonathan Capehart, who was their Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, Carol Leonnig, who was a three-time Pulitzer winner, and Dan Baltz, who I knew was a political reporter of 40 years. So they kind of got rid of some of the folks that were over 40, over 50. And what they're going to do with it, people are theorizing, well, maybe Jeff Bezos wants to turn this into an AI generated newspaper. I don't know. He was losing money. It was a money losing operation for a long, long time, but it's still an absolute shame. I do have a theory about why the Washington Post is struggling, whereas the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal are doing. They're strong. They're very healthy. But I won't go into that if you don't want to hear
No,
it.
no, you got me interested now. So if you give me the Reader's Digest version of that theory is what?
Okay. The Reader's Digest is that the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times have evolved with their audience. For
Interesting.
example, I like to cook. The New York Times has started, and it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, a feature, a service called the New York Times Cooking, and they have an app for that. And I only read the New York Times on my phone, but I always read the cooking app because I get recipes and I love it. It gives, so they've done that. That's new. They've done other things, newsletters. They've started putting videos. If you call them up on the app, there's videos, for the younger generation. The Wall Street Journal has also done that. Not as much in terms of what they, of videos and all, but they have listened to their audience and they branched out into different sort of services and information and all of that. The Washington Post, and both New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have podcasts.
Right.
The New York Times tried a podcast. It was a miserable failure. I mean, I'm sorry, the Washington Post tried a podcast. It was a miserable failure. And they didn't evolve like the other two did. And I mean, that's the theory. Or
You know,
that's, oh, yeah.
I'm thinking also not only the papers, I'm also thinking about newspapers. And I got this from my parents or my grandparents. They used to love the Reader's Digest, So Reader's
Mhm.
Digest
Mhm.
was, was was great publication to them. I would look at the comics and cartoons. Yet the Wall Street, the Reader's Digest then started shrinking, and it started going instead of, this great thing that people look forward to, kept getting smaller and smaller and changing. And sending TV Guide used to come out weekly. As a kid, you grew up on TV Guide, and
Yep.
now they publish once every 3 weeks or something. It's not the same. And so your point, I think, is well taken that I guess the place that evolved succeeded. If you didn't change or evolve, you're going to be dead.
And Blaine, if I may, just because I want to be a good journalist, I want to make sure that your readers know I do not know this, what I just told you, as fact.
Right.
This is what I've heard. This is what
Right.
I read. This is what experts tell me. But I'm certainly not trying to say that I know what I'm talking about in terms of that.
But I guess what you can do, like I do too, you can see what's happening, and you can
Mm.
just guesstimate it, and it's just the changing unless and you gave a good example of the Times, even though a certain president wouldn't agree with you, but other people, see it magnificent because they have evolved, have changed, and still I love reading it, and I still love reading it online,
Yeah.
as much as I enjoyed the print version. And that was a change, but I got used to it, and yeah.
I
And
was
so,
going to say, I think if I had one message for your listeners, readers, it would be that that world is, that the world that we knew even 15, 20 years ago in terms of journalism, text, journalism, that's gone. And if it's not gone right now, it's going to be gone in a couple of years.
well, by
Uh,
the same token, I'll ask you a question. If anybody wants to know in terms of their children, their grandchildren, whatever, and somebody tells you they want to become a journalism major, like I was as a
yeah.
kid, what do you tell them to tell their kids?
Well, first of all, I tell them to make sure they know how to write well.
Okay.
In other words, as they would say today, produce good content that people want to write. I was a comparative literature major. I never studied journalism per se, so that's an important. But I would not necessarily encourage them to try to get to work their way up the ladder to the traditional newspapers like the New York Times. There are a lot of young people, and they're doing quite well, who are becoming independent journalists. That they set up a little studio, they work the phones, they make contacts, and they begin to develop a site all on their own. And they can do that at age 20. It's kind of like going into the theater. You got to pay your dues at the very beginning, and you don't necessarily get paid really well until you have a following. But just to say, just to follow up on that, a number of the good journalists that I know about, some of them that have been left the Washington Post, but others from other organizations, now have started their own sites on Substack. I'm just one of the things I just did for my class is I'm going to show them the Substack site that Jim Acosta now does, and he used to be a CNN reporter, and he left, and that's he's producing news. So, what would I tell them? I would tell them, follow your heart, but make sure that we can't tell them at this point, follow your heart and do it in a way that we knew about it, that I would have followed my heart.
Well, it's funny you mention that because I'm just trying now to get into Substack. I'm still not into it yet. I don't quite understand it, but I'm playing with it, as an option. And then you mentioned Asheville, and I don't know if you know John Boyle, and I think
Oh
he's
yeah.
speaking to your class, or did he speaking to your class, or did?
He spoke to my class, and I have also worked with him at Asheville Watchdog.
Well, I was just going to say, so one of my favorite reporters, I just love John, and he's been a guest on my show as well when he was with the newspaper, but then he switched
Mhm.
to Watchdog, and I love reading him every day. And I love, but that's funny you said that because I read Watchdog now fairly religiously as an
Good.
option, and they do good stuff. They really do. And I guess I'm one of the few people who actually support them. I believe they should be supported financially, but they just do a great job. So that's an option where when he left,
Yes.
I was surprised because he just was such a good columnist for the newspaper. And to lose him, one of the reasons I kept with the paper was to read his column. And I was gone, so I had no choice. And interesting. So about something else you mentioned, and you talked a little bit about AI, and let's talk about how that's changing, I guess, journalism or print journalism. So I'm using AI and off and on. I'll comment on that in a second. Do you use AI at all?
I am just beginning to use it. I was absolutely AI anti
Yeah,
AI
a lot of
for
people
for
are.
quite a while. I'm still very worried about its impact, the ultimate impact it's going to have on society and the quality of life and the ability for younger people to get jobs, because there are predictions that it will get rid of all the entry level jobs within maybe 2 to 3 years. On the other hand, and it is affecting journalism quite a bit. However, you have to, in terms of being able to pull in journalism and make it useful. I think Mark may have explained to you about his
What?
new project that he's doing, where they will use AI to pull in information that is important to people, say locally, almost pulling together a local site using AI to pull things in like that. I think that's there's a real good possibility. I think that's a good future as well. Um, I just, at any rate, but AI, as I tell my class, AI is coming. It is coming. You can't turn your back on it, and it's coming a lot sooner than you think.
Well, two things are kind of interesting, I think, about AI. First of all, when I wanted to impress my wife with a poem, I'm not a poet, like, you perhaps, but AI can write poems. It's just incredible. But what was scary, though, I don't know if you've seen this at all, but AI, and I use it a good deal for different things, it's the mistakes it makes,
Yes.
but it's beyond scary because I'll point it out. I'll ask AI a question, like I'm doing a review of something, and could you tell me who starred in a movie or a show or something? It'll give me wrong information. Then right
Mhm.
back, I'm sorry, I don't say AI, but I'm sorry you have the wrong information. Then it's nice to always apologize. They say, well, sorry, we missed it. But I can't believe how increasingly much it's making mistakes. I don't know if you've seen that or hear that. Do you hear that?
Oh, absolutely. The BBC, in fact, did a study that was reported out just recently. And what they did was they took 18 news sites from 18 countries. They had 18 journalists, 14 countries, and I think 25 different languages. And they did a study of AI news sources and news reports. And I think they found that 45% of them had at least one, in their reports, had at least one bit of misinformation. The other thing AI still does is that what they call hallucinates, just makes up stuff. Um, it is it's a problem. I wish I could quote you more from that BBC study, but it's very recent, and I can send you.
Yeah,
I'm just looking. I've got one of my classes. Oh, yeah, I have one of my presentations open, but I can't get to it. I don't want to
right.
be looking at and fooling with my screen, but I can be glad to send you the link to that.
If you can, I'd be really interested
Oh
in it
yeah.
because, by the same token, the day I asked something about, I couldn't believe this. I asked who was Graham, head of a company or something, and it gave me my name and somebody else's name. I said, "Whoa," and I wrote back and said, "No, I'm not involved in the company at all." But I just couldn't believe how my name was in it, and just that's bad stuff, and
It is. Now,
so,
what
yeah.
I hear from friends who are familiar with this is, well, AI is still learning, and they're still tweaking it. It's not completely, but a lot of those mistakes will go away. Maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years at tops. But there's a lot of work being done on AI. I am very, because to me the facts, as a journalist, I always prided myself on tracking down the facts and giving both sides, or all three sides, whatever, a say and a chance to be quoted and all of that. So the fact that AI might be hallucinating material, as a journalist, just fills me with dread. But as I said, it's coming. The other thing that also concerns me about AI, and I hope you don't mind if I just mention this, I'm taking a class right now with an artist doing some art, and she has said to the class, I I ask AI to tell me, I'm doing this design. Is that going to work? Is that going to work? And he always helps me with the design. He really makes it better. And then I did a design without his help the other day, and he said it was terrific. Notice he, not it, not the app, he. And that's what kind of, as I said, from an impact on society, people are beginning to personalize it. Um,
Well,
you may remember the movie 2001: A Space
sure,
Odyssey,
yeah.
and the computer, that sentient computer that wouldn't open the Bombay doors. I open the Bombay doors, Hal. I can't do that, Dave.
Well, my wife and I actually gave Chat a name. We call him Sparky now. It's just like you're saying. We didn't want to. call chat all the time, so we call him Sparky,
Mhm.
Um, but it changes. But changes, and you m mentioning the other person who I had on the show that yeah, that's a way to present newspapers. I mean, present news. I guess you could ask to write a whole paper using AI, or I guess people have been doing that, have they? Or you could do
Yes. Oh, yeah, they're doing it now.
that.
And in
So,
fact, I found a website that is developed by AI for other AI chatbots.
really?
I'll send you, it's called Molt Book, as in, and I'll send you the link to that. It's pretty amazing. Um,
Well,
so,
you know what? It's a little amazing but scary also because it reminds me of like when the internet came out, and you
mhm.
could you believe everything on the internet? And again, I guess in some respects it makes people have to be more discerning than they ever used to be
Yes.
because just because it's on, where do you hear it? It was on the computer, or what's scary too is that if people say, where'd you get the information? And then it didn't really come from the New York Times or the Washington Post or something
Mhm.
else, and people just give it credit, so I still look for sources, I want to find
Mhm.
sources. I still look for sources that I find at least reliable, even
Yep.
though some other people don't. But let's talk about that then with respect to print journalism, because boy, has that changed the name of the game too. It used to be that you'd read something, you could
Mhm.
believe it. I still do to a certain extent, but yet it's been, criticized, or again, we won't mention any names, but certain presidents say because it's in a certain publication, you can't believe it, or fake, the infamous fake news. How do you draw the line between what you read and what is not, what is news versus what's fake news?
Can I answer one of your comments
Sure.
about, did you know that fake news has been around since 44 BC?
Oh, really?
Fake news is not new. It's in fact Benjamin Franklin, who started his own,
Right.
who worked with newspapers, did a fake letter that got published. What he was trying to do was to encourage British readers to contribute to an effort to pay off columnists who had had trouble building, farms. So, I mean, AI did not start, just 10, 12, 30 years ago. But you asked about how do you draw the line? What do you do?
Right.
Um, in my class, I developed a slide that shows, a family reading the newspaper together. Back when I was a kid, the newspaper arrived on your front door. You picked it up, you read it, and that was your news, and you trusted it. That doesn't work anymore. And how do you trust it? In a short answer, because everybody in my class has asked me this: how do I find stuff I trust?
Right.
And the answer is you have to do your homework. And people, I think, want to say to me, well, what do you trust? I'll just read that. Or, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to look up things like that. You can find what you do when I say do your homework is try out different sites, try out different news sources, see what you think. It doesn't make sense, and then check what those news sources are reporting in other check other sources to back up whether or not that's real. The news they're reporting is trustworthy. It's just not. It's not. There's not one spot serves all, and you just have to do your research.
One of the things I still like doing is I get Apple News. I don't know if you read
Mm-hmm.
Apple
Oh, yeah.
News. One of the things I like about it, just your point, is it gives me, I think, at least a somewhat balanced
Mm-hmm.
exposure to it. I can read the journal, but unfortunately, the New York Times isn't part of it, but I can read the journal, I can read the
Mm-hmm.
Washington Post. I kind of like that I could at
Yeah.
least see different options
Yeah.
as opposed to just seeing one thing all the time,
Yep.
Um,
That's what I'm talking about. And if you get to the point where you're feeling a little bit, not quite sure that you trust one, then go look for another one. There are a lot of sites out there, and you don't necessarily have to use one of the established media. I mean, as I said, by the way, I listen to podcasts on. I, I'm not, I'm not advertising, but Spotify is what I use
right.
to get Substack. um, information. But I mean, there are podcasts, there are news sites. I mean, get on the internet and say, I'm looking for this. Give me several sites that cover this kind of material.
How about facts? How about fact checking?
Oh yeah, fact checking. In fact, I'm looking at one of the slides right now behind my computer that I have that I talk to my clients about. And yes, there are fact checking sites. Now, the difficulty for me with some of them is there are maybe 10, 12, 15 out there. For me, the difficulty is people say, I want something that's not biased. Well, there is always a little bit of bias in how the news is reported. No, I mean, we're all human beings. And when I say there's a little bit of bias, would I prefer to talk about dogs, write a story about a dog than a cat? And I have my cat in my lap, but would I prefer a dog? Yeah, I would. So you're going to tend to see more stories about dogs from me, a little bit. But there are fact-checking sites. I'll tell you one online right now on this video podcast. Sorry, PolitiFact, and I'll send you the for that. It is a Pulitzer Prize-winning site. It's done by the Poynter Institute, which is a very well-respected journalism institute nonprofit, and the institute is 50 years old. And that's the one I tell everybody to look at. There are people there are sites out there that tend to say, we can tell you what's, what the bias is. Is it right wing? Is it left wing? Is it, communist, whatever. I don't like those things because the whole question is, who is making the judgment behind those judgments?
Johnny, I was going to ask you about that. Even though when I see those sites, left and right, and then you see in the middle. It seems to me it looks pretty objective, but as you said, somebody had to make that determination in the first place. But I'll try to read a publication that's, if you will, somewhat in the middle, at least according to that site, as opposed to something definitely, is very left, very right, whatever. And I still read it, but then we talk about New York Times, yet some people swear New York Times is the most biased paper out there, but I love the Times, and at least when I read it, it seems I don't read lots of stuff about conspiracy theories. I don't read stuff that's also name calling and abusive, whatever. I still love it, but yet I'll occasionally watch or listen to Fox News, to see is there another side to it. I don't know. Do you ever do that?
I read the New York Times primarily. I don't watch a lot of television news except on one channel that does have a particular political leaning, and I really don't want to say
Okay.
because my politics are not part of the journalism, and I tell my class this is not a class on politics. We're not going to discuss that. There's a class on journalism. So if you've got an issue about how one news site or another news site is treating a certain person in politics, take that outside of the class because that's not what we're discussing. And that's what I feel like here. I don't want people to feel like I'm trying to steer them toward, one side or the other or however. However, I can understand. I do think looking at different as you said, Fox News versus the New York Times. That's a good way to do your research. And if that works for you, or if that works for you in terms of what you're trying to do to get what you think is a balanced news viewpoint, that's exactly what you should be doing.
In terms of your course, so talk a little bit about the course. Now, have you offered it before? Or is this the first time you've offered it?
This is the second time I taught the course. It is at OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Center at UNCA. It's a great learning center for people over 50, I think. They have hundreds of classes on all sorts of things. A friend of mine teaches knitting at OLLI. I proposed this particularly because of the political things that have been going on the last couple of years, and people would be talking about, well, why don't why doesn't the news do this or that? So I went to Ollie and said, well, I wasn't, I was in the news business. I'd like to teach a course and kind of give people some background. And they said, fine. So I taught it last winter, and then I'm teaching it this winter. But as I mentioned to you, the difficulty is I've had to rework 50% of that class because things have changed so dramatically in the news business between last winter and this winter that I can't be telling. There's things that I really don't want to touch on that are no good, or things that they need to know about more that are more important than some of the things I covered last year. So that's where it's coming from.
Do you think he'll teach it again?
I would love to. I may be making a change in where I live, so and that's kind of up in the air. If I'm still in Asheville, yeah, I'd love to.
It's like you said, Ollie is kind of one of the great parts about living in Nashville is
Yes.
that, my wife has taught dance courses there. I took a stand-up comedy course there. It's just a magnificent way to people to learn, but also not having to take tests and write papers,
Oh, yeah.
but
Yeah.
also to offer it like you do, to offer to teach a course, just a great thing to do. With respect to back to then the course itself. So just if you would just highlight some of the things you covered in the course, if you would. So it's and you're into last week, right? Coming in,
Coming
coming.
in the last week.
But what were some of the topics you covered?
Oh, let's see. I started out with the history of newspapers, of printed. We started out with the development of printing, and because that needed to lead up to, and then when newspapers, when they first came to Europe, when they first came to the United States, I wanted people to know that history. We talked about the history of women reporters and of African American reporters, because they're a little bit different, but of course they are essential to the history of reporting, particularly text-based reporting. Let's see, we talked about how to do your research, how to tell if something is trustworthy, what are the things that you look for, what are the tips that you use. That's where I came up with some of the websites I will let you know about. I also did one whole class on the whole reporting, how and the role of editors, I should say, and how they shape the news. And we went, we discussed what editors are, what they do, and I used clips from several movies. I've done that also in my fake news course. So, keep it entertaining. And then this one, I'll simply be talking about, what the future of, I have newspapers, but I've crossed that out and said the future of news. And I'll be doing that. And then, of course, I'll have a guest speaker.
Totally, Graham. Don't knock yourself out on this, but if you do send me some of the sites you've talked about, what I'll do is I'll include them in the description of the
Sure,
podcast. So I think people would like to see that. If you want to get some more information about some of the things Graham mentioned, feel free to check this out.
I will
Course is
do that.
all, course is over. What's in the in your future? Do you have any other things that you're working on that you can share? You mentioned you've written 2 books. Do we have
I
a
wrote
third
two
book
books.
coming? Do we have a third book coming down the road?
I have been working on a novel for many years and have never finished it. So, I would love to have time to just do that. I'm not in reporting mode. Both of my books were nonfiction. They were, essentially reporting. And I think at this point in my life, that takes just too much effort. But the other things, I said I semi-retired. I went into consulting about 25 years ago, and I still occasionally take, a gig. I work for, on the roster of, proposal consultants for a company called Shipley Associates that's worldwide, and they just keep my name up there. And if something comes up, they think I do a good job, they call me and say, well, would you like to take this? So I do that. Then I have other interests of my own. I take a strength training class. It's all of us ladies over 60, and we lift weights. I can lift a barbell with 85 pounds of weights on it.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
Very cool.
anyhow.
Yeah, I work at the trainer, but I don't know if I could even do the barbell lift. That's pretty impressive, 85 pounds and over, but really cool. So it sounds like you keep busy. Would you say that's true?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, someone said, are you ever going to retire? I've tried to retire 3 times. And I have to say, I get bored. Now, there are lots of things I'm learning that I enjoy doing. Hold on a second. I've got a cat getting out of my lap. And a lot of things, but I have to stay, if I'm not engaged in something that interests me with, and particularly out among people, that, I'm not happy. So,
It's funny you say that. My wife says I'm busier now than when I was working
mhm,
full time. So that's kind of
mhm,
a good sign. Graham,
yep.
if folks want to get in touch with you, either talk about some of the things you talked about on the air or find out about your other courses, best place to reach by email. Is that a good way to
Email is
reach
the
you?
best, yes.
And if you could share that information?
Yeah, do you want me to spell out my email? Because
Yeah,
it's a little
just fill out
complex.
and I'll put it in the I'll include it in the write up. But the email address is what?
The email address is, and my name, Graham, is spelled a little funny, so I'm going to go slowly. It's Graham.Browning02, but Graham is spelled Graeme. Then there's a dot. Then the last name is Browning02, and it's at Gmail.
And that was I always I'm glad you shared that because that distinguishes you between Graham Browning '02 and '03 and '04. Yeah, are there other? I always wonder about that. There are other Graham Brownings. Really, Graham, I'd like to thank you for being my guest edition of the Blaine's World podcast. I would also like to thank my producer, Capucetti, and hopefully one of these days maybe we'll even bump into each other sometime. That'd be great.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Graham. Appreciate it.